Hello and welcome to QInsight, brought to you by QGate, the podcast where honest conversations meet business transformation. I'm Steve Clarke.
And I'm Alastair Jupp. In today's episode, we're joined by Luke Williams, Head of AI at Intergage. We'll be digging into where businesses can get value from AI, the importance of governance and distinguishing hype from reality.
Luke, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much for being here today. So Luke is the head of AI at Intergage, where he helps B2B businesses apply artificial intelligence in ways that are practical, strategic, and measurable. So with a background that spans marketing strategy, systems integration, data analytics, and agency leadership. Luke has a rare ability to connect the dots between technical capability and commercial value. He's worked with organizations of all size to modernize their approach to content, customer journeys, and operations, most recently focusing on how AI can support, more importantly, not in place, the human element in decision making. So Luke, hopefully that sums it up nicely. I will, to spare your blushes, state for our listeners that our producer Phil wrote that rather than you sending that over beforehand. So if there's anything we've missed, it would be fantastic if you could fill in any gaps if there may be some.
Yeah, I think the important bit of context for me is I also run the Campfire AI training for Dorset Chamber, which we've done for the last year, which has been predominantly for local businesses, small, medium size, and a few larger ones. And that's been really great. And so I think that's good context to give.
Absolutely. No, that's brilliant, Luke. Once again, thanks for being here. So this is our second episode, of course. In our first episode, we broached the subject of AI, which I think will form a large proportion of what we talk about in the series of these podcasts. But what I'd like to kick off with today is where AI is adding value. So if I could ask a question of you off the bat to get things rolling, what kinds of tasks and workflows do you believe are genuinely benefiting from AI right now?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with a slightly political answer, I think, is that most folks are still experimenting and piloting. I think one thing I'd love to get in straight off the bat, and sorry to hijack your very first question and go on a fun channel, is that I think there is a big perception out there, and this is, I've spoken at a couple of big events in the last week, and everyone thinks that everyone is further ahead. So I think the first thing to say is there are some real great use cases out there, be it smarter automations, transcribing calls, helping with analysis, things like that. I would say that probably it's some of the simple things that people are getting the most measurable impact from at the moment. So that's simple custom GPTs or Copilot agents, whatever you want to call them, that are performing fairly simple functionality at the moment, or it's enhancing existing automations for processes. So those are two of the kind of main areas I see at the moment.
Excellent. Ali, how about yourself?
Let me give you a couple of examples that I've heard of recently. So these are specific things that I've heard, right? There was one guy who is a manager and he got fed up with people contacting him, his team, asking him the same question over and over again. So he basically downloaded his thoughts into a structured format and stuck on the top of it an agent. And now they're all going through this agent to ask the questions that they would be asking him. And he's freed up some time on the back of that. The second one I had was a guy who's leaving the business. And let's call him James, for example. And as part of his exit, what they got him to do was write down all the things he did and the knowledge he had as part of his exit from the business. And then they built an agent, asked James on the front of it, so that when he left the business, they had still someone to interrogate to ask those questions. And these are they're only little things, right, that just build momentum in a business, that just serve little things. And I think that's where I see a lot of the benefit. There's just one more thing I just want to put on here, that there's a term that I've heard recently called the capacity gap. And I thought this was really interesting, right? That 80% of workers lacked enough time and energy to do their job. Yet most SMB leaders say productivity must increase. Now you've got a clash there. I think that's where AI really fits for me in adding value in a business.
Excellent. So, Ali, just to confirm what I've heard, so in terms of this chap that left the business and then his knowledge was almost inserted into that AI interface and then used for retrieving knowledge further down the line, should I be concerned if you start asking me a lot of questions about my job?
Can possibly answer that.
No, I know. I'll decline any meetings from you henceforth.
I think that is very representative of what I'm talking about there with custom GPTs and Copilot agents. one other example that I give directly is, we set up a HR bot so that it had our one folder on SharePoint, and that has the single source of truth for employee handbook and all those kind of things, maternity policy, holiday policy, all of that kind of stuff. And just a simple Copilot agent that can just reference that one folder and only that one folder. It doesn't go out to the web. And, that has helped reduce contacts to our director that does HR, because it's just all in one central place, and she knows that she can update the documents in that folder and anyone can get access to it. And I think that's, similar to what Alastair's saying there. It's a very kind of common use case of collating a single source of truth that can be interrogated, and be that a chatbot on a website or be that in something that's internal. I think they are great, simple use cases that can be set up quite easily.
So on our last episode, we started talking about the different almost pillars of AI and the tools that are out there. And one thing that I think is coming to the fore is almost a separation of really into kind of quite a binary sorting mechanism. So in two different buckets of efficiency tools versus insight tools. And I think, the more we start to use AI, there's a kind of almost a clear distinction in efficiency versus insight, and obviously the decisions that are able to be made off the back of insight that is AI generated. Ali, have you seen anything in the market to kind of confirm that?
I actually question there's one other to add to that list, actually, which is value add tools. And I think that's where monetization can come in the future, where if you're adding more value to a client so you can commercially sell it for more money. But typically the things that we're seeing, knowledge base, kind of anywhere where there's a large data set of information that's structured in a reasonable format, or can be structured in a reasonable format, that's where a lot of the tools are coming to the surface at the moment.
Luke, anything to add to that? I mean, is that fairly representative?
I don't know if I see such a clear distinction. I'm not sure if it's aware to be controversial on the second ever guest, but
No, please do.
I think things like Notebook LM can be really, it's a really simple tool from Google that you can use to throw in all your documents about a client, for example. And then when you're onboarding a new member of the team to work with that client, they've got a space they can ask questions of that kind of body of work. And you could put your transcripts in there, you could put all kinds of stuff in there. And I think from that, you can also mine it for insights as well as it is efficiency in terms of onboarding people. So I think I probably see those two things kind of working quite closely together. Depends on how you're using it, I suppose. And even when you look at some of the analysis stuff you can do now, as the context window's got larger, Google Gemini Pro now do 1.5 million tokens, which is a ridiculous amount of information, really. When you look at things of that size, obviously you can do more detailed stuff with it. And I think sometimes I see clients who start with bits of analysis that's kind of for efficiency and it's kind of looking at that side of things, but actually they find something out that they weren't expecting. And I think so, you can be open to both those things happening. But yeah, there is a bit of a efficiency tool, I suppose, where it's people improving their automations and things like that. And then I guess that's maybe on the insight side. But I don't know if I see those as two separate things. I think they overlap quite a lot for me.
Yeah, absolutely fair. Okay, and before we move on to our next subject, I want to pose a question to both of you. Have you seen any client use cases that have really surprised you around AI across efficiency, insight, or otherwise?
I spent a bit to think about this and nothing really jumped out for me. I've done quite a few seminars and workshops recently, and I mean, I think the only one that's amused me, I don't know if it was unexpected or so, was someone I worked with who was making custom children's bedtime stories every day with their daughter. So they would build a custom GPT that they could chat to, and the daughter would say what they wanted the story to be this evening. I thought it was a slight surprise, but I don't know if it was hugely unusual.
No, I think it's probably just an indication of adoption of AI as a whole, so rather than a specific use case. Ali, how about yourself?
Obviously, the two I mentioned earlier, but for me, there was one other one actually, which was really interesting, where a colleague, well, it was a partner of mine actually, who created a massive tender document. It was about 40 or 50 pages long. And he was prompted to say, look, would you like a podcast built out of this? And so he gave it a go and it created a podcast for him. He then sent that to one of his clients, the CEO, who's obviously a busy person, and then sent this podcast with it. And I just thought that was absolute genius because, the CEO absolutely loved that, right? They didn't have to sit there and read this massive document and they could read this podcast. I know it's kind of more of a use case rather than an actual application. But I thought it was fascinating and a way you can add value to clients, right?
Absolutely. Interestingly, you say that we had a call with another guest, a future guest that we're due to have on the podcast, and we said, right, we've done our first episode. We'll send it over as a kind of precursor to give you an idea of the tone and the focus on the podcast itself. And he said we said we haven't got the video quite edited yet, but the audio is ready to go. And he said, no, that's fine. Just send the audio. I don't have time to sit there for half an hour and watch a video podcast. I will listen to it in dead time, in the car, on the train, on the tube, whatever it might be. And actually it speaks volumes into what Ali was saying about that. The ability to dedicate long periods of time throughout your day, whether it's work or outside, is diminishing rapidly. So, giving someone the opportunity to perhaps get up to speed whilst they would just be traveling somewhere is ideal.
Yeah, Notebook LM is really great for that. I don't know if you've seen, but in the last couple of weeks, they've updated their features in that regard quite extensively. So you can set the number of hosts and do all sorts of customizations that you couldn't do before. And yeah, big shout out to my boss, Paul. He uses that a lot. If there's a topic he needs to learn and understand, he will put it into Notebook LM and then, put a summary into his car via his phone.
Excellent. Great stuff. So, Luke, we had a pre-production call last week, and where we kind of talked about the topics that we broached today and any particular areas that we might want to talk about. And one thing that virtually immediately you brought up as something you were quite passionate about is AI statements. And AI is relatively new and perhaps not so new for some, but the more we use it, the wider the applications become, the use cases become, and people start using it, outside of work, inside of work. And you brought up AI statements as something that actually this is super important. This is what businesses should be focusing on and getting nailed down pretty quick. So we'll start from the top. What is an AI statement, and
Sure.
why does it matter?
So for us, it formed the beginning of our AI adoption journey as an agency and as a group of companies. And I think as time has moved on, I've started to see this as more of a brand statement. It's a positioning statement about who you are and how you want to work. And we're starting to get inquiries either during procurement process sometimes, and also just sort of wider in terms of how do you use AI? What do you use it for? What are the ways you use it? And, kind of what are your ethics around it? And I'm seeing, I did 2 panel discussions last week and ethics came up on both of those where we were talking about, is it human plus AI? Is it AI going to replace people? How does it work? What are your kind of, what are your main aims? And I think it's really important just for a business to set out, what you use AI for, how you use it ethically, effectively, legally, and that transparency of use is an important part of all of the legislation that's out there. It's part of the ICO principles. Okay, they're being updated because of the Data Use and Access Act, but it is part of the 4 principles the ICO gave. It's, it's key to the EU AI Act, regardless of the level that you're looking at. Transparency is really important. And so for us, it's just slightly over 1 page summary that just says these are the ways that we use AI. Here are some of the use cases we use it for. And I think for some folks, it's just important to say what you'll not use it for. I'm aware of some businesses whose AI statement says we will not use AI for these specific tasks as an organization. We will use it for transcribing, analysis, things like that, but we won't use it for production of client deliverables or whatever it might be. And I'm also aware of a creative agency who has an AI statement that essentially says we don't use any form of AI in our business. We don't think it's for us. We don't think it's ethically right, and that's who we are. And so I think as the use of AI and as people's perceptions of it change, we're starting to see a bit of a backlash in some circles. People will want to know how your organization uses AI. And I'm not talking here about a full policy, because generally when we sit down and review things like privacy policies or computer usage policies, actually they apply for AI tools as much as they do anything else. Usually it's just tweaks around understanding that AIs will hallucinate and why that happens and what you will do about it. So for us, that means that any content that's produced by AI or significantly modified by AI goes through a content checklist to make sure that it doesn't have any of those things in it, so that it always has a human in the loop when we do that. And, that's an important part of what we are and what we sell to our clients is we're saying, look, we do use AI to save us time on the back end tasks, to help us, to work as a mentor, to work with us. But we do not believe in it replacing our team. It is human plus AI is very central to our AI statement. And it just sets out who we are. I was on a panel in Exeter on Friday, actually, and one of the questions from the audience was, there's so many tools and so many things and so many talks, I have no idea where to start. And actually, I think sensible AI adoption starts with working out what are your values. Start with an AI statement will make you work out who you are, how you want to use it. What do our clients expect us to use it? Where should we be transparent about our use? What do we not want to use it for? And you'll also then start to logically lead on to, well, what are our use cases? Where can we use it to reduce the meaningless tasks that we don't want to spend time on? So I had a sales guy who used to spend 2 or 3 hours transcribing his calls afterwards. He does that and now he spends 20 minutes checking the transcript, right? That's not time that it's time that he's saving, but it's not value added time that he's lost. It's not a task that he's just given over that he would have got someone else to do. It means he can spend more time having better conversations with prospects and he's not spending as long transcribing the call. Yes, we still have in place checks on the output of the data. It will still sometimes get a name wrong or a product name wrong or things like that, where they're phonetically similar to real words, for example. But actually, generally, the time taken to check through a transcript has come down a lot. Even I've noticed that in the last 6 months or year, particularly.
Excellent. I know QGate, we've been looking at AI statements and the applications of that. What's your take on it?
It was interesting. One of the first things we did after that call was to get our AI statement up, right? So, and I think that is the world of AI at the moment, right? We're all learning from each other. It is a little Wild West, right? It certainly feels that way. And I think it's kind of a starting point certainly for leaders in businesses to have a bit of control, right? It's a starting point for that control. But I was really interested to hear you didn't necessarily say it was tied to the policy, whereas I saw it as an extension of our policy out to the client. Is that a correct way to look at it?
No, I mean, we very clearly do make reference to it. So within that statement, we do have a section for safety. So we do say, the use of AI will align with our privacy policy and our terms and conditions of business and all that kind of stuff. And vice versa, we do have a line in those areas that leads back to it. So yeah, for us, it is an extension of our kind of our terms and conditions of business, but also our promise to our clients. But more than that, I think it's also a statement of who you are to your staff and your team and partners that you work with. And I think that's really important. We've had people who were recent graduates that made reference to our AI statement when they applied or when they were first interviewed. I think when you think of talent and attraction, if you're looking at 2 companies and they've got an offer, one of them has an AI statement and one of them doesn't, and you're quite a forward-thinking fresh graduate, for example, which one are you going to go for?
But there was a stat that I was shown last week that said 75% of people are bringing AI to work. To be honest, I reckon it's probably more than that. But then they said 80% of them are bringing their own AI to work. So if you're sat there, you've got these company values that you put in place to build your culture, and then you've got bring people bringing tools in that are actually breaching those values, right? You've got a problem, and where it will end, I don't know. Whether it's a massive deal, I don't know at the moment. But, it's that statement actually for me made the policy a lot more understandable, I think. Because
I mean, in some ways you can think of it as a summary of all the relevant bits that apply to it.
Yeah.
And then, to support our statement, anyone that joins Intergage will have a training session with me to make sure they understand the statement, to go through the basics of it, what that means to them. And we have a list of, but then we have a simple assessment so that if someone comes to us and says, but do you live by these values? I can show that everyone, when they joined, has been through that training on which date they did it and their score if I wanted to. And, in our we have a monthly catch up, which actually tomorrow. I also give updates on AI every month. So these are the new things you need to know, that we live by that and update it. And we're in the process of updating our AI statement. It's not a one and done. Things evolve as technologies evolve and new use cases come about. So we're currently adding a section specifically around recruitment and what we expect of candidates applying for us using AI and vice versa, where we do and don't use it in the recruitment process. Because, it became clear that although that was kind of covered as part of a wider thing, we wanted to spell some of that out specifically because it is a debate that particularly students that I've spoken to, are having at the moment.
Look, a question on that. You talk about AI statements and you're setting out as a business what you're going to be using AI from. And Ali, you mentioned the percentages of, 75, 80% of people bringing their own AI into the workplace. Where do you stand on the level of control with that? Because you will have people perhaps using AI platforms that aren't in line with those policies, that maybe, that aren't as secure or safe, that utilize spurious sources or whatever. How do you even start to control that?
So I think most businesses, that will be covered by their existing IT acceptable use policy, right? And it's just reinforcing that. So, we do have a line in our AI statement about that to say, in line with this, but also as, a supporting kind of foundation document, if you like, of our AI adoption. We have a register of the AI tools that we use. And when someone wants to use a new one, we've got a series of checks we put it through. Is it just one man in a shed that set it up? Has that site got a privacy policy? Have they got a statement about how they use our data and all these kind of things? So we've got, I think it's about 20 fairly quick questions that we'll go through and review when there is a new tool. But I think you absolutely hit it on the head. And I think it's part of why businesses really do need an AI statement is people are going to use this stuff anyway. And so as a business, at least set out the guidelines you want them to think about when they use it and train them and support them to do that. So are they considering how the data is used in trading? Because we don't want to put client data into, another system. Are they thinking about GDPR if they're going to use it with personal identifiable information? All of these kind of things and at the moment, there's a real concern around tools like DeepSeek, for example. If you've ever read the term, if you want to have nightmares, go and read the terms and conditions of DeepSeek, right? The usage of data on there is very, very clear in their privacy policy that they've got on their site, and horrific, frankly. It says we can use any data for any purpose whatsoever for as long as we want, in any ways we want, and it will go to the Chinese government. It really clearly says that in there. And it really worries me from a safety and security point of view when I see what I would refer to as AI influencers on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever just saying, hey, look, you pay for this. You can use DeepSeek because it's great and it's free and it's a real good reasoning model. And there's no kind of thought to GDPR or data or privacy or any of that stuff. I think my proudest compliment I had after a conference I spoke at the end of last year was someone came up to me and said, I loved your talk. The best thing about it was you were the first person I've seen talk about AI who mentioned GDPR. I think that's genuinely a really good compliment because it worries me that people don't talk about these things. When talk about vibe coding, they'll say, oh, you don't need to pay for any SaaS, software as a service anymore. You can just vibe code an application yourself, or you can make this and you can be making £1 million a month. It has yes, but then you're not going to have done any unit tests. You're not going to have security. You probably put your API keys out in public. You still need domain expertise. And that's another kind of key factor, I think, of having an AI statement is saying, right, well, if we do use something like vibe coding, for example, so where we're writing prompts to create prototypes or MVPs, we've got to use it in that particular way. We're not using it as a final application. We use it as a proof of concept, or we use it to help us towards a final design. But you can spot an AI expert because they seem to ignore domain expertise as being really important. And that's also why we and our AI statement say human plus AI is the best combination.
So another of the topics that we spoke about on the pre-production call was, and that was a kind of a three-parter, was code, hype, and vibe coders. Now, I know code, of course. I know hype in the various charts and Gartners and all these different perceptions. Vibe coders is a new one from me. What was a vibe coder? Could you give us an understanding?
Sure. So it's become a bit of a term for people that are building applications using prompts. So, tools like Cursor, Lovable, Bolt, things like that, where you will type in a prompt and it will create an application for you. They use varying technologies in the background, but that's kind of essentially it. So vibe coding is the idea of not having, and actually doesn't always, but generally tends to refer to someone who doesn't necessarily have conventional programming experience. They're just kind of creating code on the vibe, like by the vibe, and kind of doing it that way. And I think it's really interesting in a way for creating a proof of concept, or perhaps if you're someone who's not technical and you want to you want to build something with a technical team, and it gives you a way of getting to a prototype or a way of showing what you want to build quicker. And I think it can be very helpful for that. But I think at the moment there's a lot of hype, to come to your second point there, around, you don't need software as a service anymore. And I think that's just complete nonsense and really worrying. I think it was Lovable, and I'm sure someone in the comments might pick me up on this, but I'm pretty sure it's them. They had their top 5 apps on their store thing hacked in one afternoon, because the people that had built them didn't know about security. It wasn't set up that way. There were API keys that were visible. There was data was just stored in unencrypted blobs. There was kind of all these things that anyone who seriously works in software engineering would know to look out for a build. And so, yes, they're great, and yes, they can get you to some nice simple things that you can play with and show and demo, and even maybe use as an MVP at a push. But I think you still need that domain expertise again to make sure you understand about the basics of unit testing, security, whatever the things might be, hashing passwords, all of that kind of stuff. If you don't know what you don't know. And I think another example I'd give of that was an event in Southampton I was at last week, where there was a panel of lawyers speaking before me, and one of the things they talked about was they've started to have people come to them with what the client would describe as a ready-made contract. They just want them to review. They don't want to do a big bit of work on. They tried to cut corners by prompting to create a legal contract. And actually, it will take them as long or longer to review that. And quite often they will spot glaring holes in it right away, rather than to write it from scratch. And you see the same thing with vibe coding. And I think generally that's very true of AI as a whole, is it can get you to 80% of there much quicker, but the last 20% is a lot harder. And that 20% requires real expertise in your field. And when you give your 80% thing to someone with that, actually it's sometimes easiest for them to start again. Now, I'm sure that will get better as time goes on, but it kind of puts us in a weird position where if 80% is good enough, then fine, but accept that that's probably all you're going to get to, with certainly without domain knowledge, without that expertise in that given field, be it legal, coding, marketing, whatever. But you know what? For a lot of startup folks or people, wanted to work on their own, that's enough. They can probably get to that point where they can start building from that to build a real business. And I think, as an extension, that we'll see more people working for themselves in the age of AI. To the hype point you mentioned, I think one thing I see a lot is what I call hype and pace paralysis. Is there's just so many new tools, so many things people are shouting about. It can be a bit overwhelming. And my approach to that is always to start with the use cases. What are the things you want to do, and find a way of doing it? Not, here are 1,000 new AI tools and I need to try all of them, experiment with how. You don't need to worry about that, If you want to spend a bit of time exploring some of those occasionally, fine, but don't feel you need to. On from that is people always, almost without fail, I will get a question in a workshop or something else. What's the best of ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, whatever? And honestly, on one panel, I said roll a dice, because it can be the best one this week and it's not the best next week. And actually, unless you're in a real niche specialist area, they're generally all pretty good and are fairly interchangeable. Even if you write a wrapper on ChatGPT using their API, you can switch it to another service easy enough if there is something that you find doesn't work. And on that, what I often say to people is they all have a slightly different kind of, for want of a better word, personality. I know that some creative folks get on better with Claude because of the way it writes words. ChatGPT recently launched for the paid subscribers that you can choose a personality. So if you go into your settings, you can have it act more like a robot or more like a friend or more like a whatever. And you've always been able to add custom instructions, but they've actually set for personalities. So have an experiment with that, because honestly, a lot of the time when people say AI isn't working for them, actually it's kind of almost a personality clash now, because these models are so convincing. And what I would say is try a few of them. Try Gemini, try Perplexity, try whatever, and see which ones work for you.
I think we Siri a lot from just able to change the voice to male to female, the tone, the accent. just to be able to relate, because I don't know which country it was, but there was, I think it might have been Garmin maybe 10-15 years ago that had to put different voices, male, female or other, because there were some people that were ignoring prompts from a certain tone of voice or gender, just so they had to put others in because they were going, no, I'm not going to listen to this thing because it's talking nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, ChatGPT's had a lot of different voices, but the personality is a different thing. So yes, the voices will have different tonal pace, for example, for some of them, particularly on ChatGPT, and when you're
Absolutely.
using the advanced voice mode. But actually changing the personality, I think, is a big step forward with ChatGPT 5. And again, you could give it custom instructions that are how you write instructions for it to behave. But actually these kind of fundamental personalities, I find that fascinating that they're doing that, and that, we're kind of at that point where people are tweaking the personality of a artificial intelligence that they speak to every day. I mean, let's just say that sentence and then step back for a second, right?
Yeah.
You think we'd been here a year, 2, 3 years ago? I don't know. I don't think I did, maybe.
No. Brilliant. Ali, we work with our customers, and we touched on last week that we have business leaders coming to us asking about AI and how can it be utilized in their particular project. And we talk about the hype and the pace at which these new tools are coming to the fore. How do we cut through all that hype and find the actual use cases that will meet a business need?
Just for the record, right? I personally have built several personal and professional things on these applications, but not one of them have I put live because I'm scared stiff of putting live, because I don't know, right? I don't know what's been built, and I don't know, and so if that's the case as a leader, you really don't want that in your production. I think there was a story not so long ago about a Replit case where it deleted the database, their business database, and you just don't want that in your production space, right? You just don't. We're looking. Obviously we're a Microsoft partner, so we're looking more and more at the Microsoft area, just from a security and a safe perspective, and fallback that actually, if this goes wrong, we've got someone to go to. So those public facing kind of ones that don't have that big reputation behind them, I personally I wouldn't want those going into production. I'm not sure I've answered your question there, Steve, but I thought it was a good, interesting perspective on it, that I've built stuff and I think it's amazing, right? You can have an application in 10 minutes and it's great for certain things, but it's not ready for production space yet at all.
Yeah. Excellent stuff. So look, just to kind of wrap up there then, and I'll ask this question of both of you, and Luke, I'll ask you to kick off. There will be leaders of SMEs, SMBs, business leaders listening to this right now. If you could give some advice to SME leaders or a business leader trying to choose where to begin on this, where did they start?
I think we had that very question when I did some work with Dorset Chamber, and that's where we kind of set up our Campfire AI training with them, which I'm doing with other areas as well. Do some stuff with Winchester and Test Valley Council and people like that. For us, a quite simple roadmap is, audit what's currently in use. Some of your teams will be doing stuff anyway that you might not be aware of. I had a workshop I ran last year where 2 people from the same company were sat right at the front. And when I said, who's using ChatGPT in their organization? One said yes and one said no. And they sort of stopped and looked at each other. And it was this weird moment where most of the room noticed that happened. And I kind of let it roll. And actually, the fact that 2 people coming to an AI seminar didn't know what each other were using, I thought was just fascinating, but very indicative of where we were. And I think where we are for a lot of folks. So start by taking a bit of an audit of what people are using, because you might find that people are using it in ways that are actually quite clever. And then, I'm going to be boring, but have an AI statement. It's a great way to start thinking as a business, right? Because that opens up questions of, well, who needs to be involved in creating that statement? You need to have some from all parts of the business. How do we want to use it? What do our customers expect? It's all the right questions to be asking about that. And then the third part for me, there's many more, but the third big one for me would be start with use cases. So have a look at, okay, where are the ways we can use it? What I quite often find is when people are reviewing ways of working with AI. The first phase is very much of improving bits of a process and automating it or improving it with AI. The second one is rewriting the whole thing in the way they become more native with AI. And I think you'll see businesses move across that, nothing, bits of it, whole process as kind of an approach. And then, just kind of, that would be my three main things. I think take a bit of an audit, put together an AI statement, because that will force you to consider your privacy policy, how your staff are trained, whether you want a human in the loop, all those kind of things. And then, start with use cases. What things you do and do not want to use AI for, and spell that out.
Excellent. Thank you, Luke. Ali, anything to add?
Structured guidance and practical application, right? Those are the kind of things that businesses need to move forward with it. We've put together the 6 pillars of getting started on AI. I think practicality over novelty, the biggest one on there is the second one, which is use case clarity and roadmap, is understand what you're going to build and why you're going to build it. And if it doesn't have an output for the business, you shouldn't be building it. And that's, it's one of the first things to understand for me. I think the other part is, I think skills are needed going forward are going to change drastically. The people's ability to prompt effectively is going to become more and more important. To be able to apply the technology to a problem not from a technical perspective, but almost a prompting perspective is going to become essential. So start looking at your super users, if you like, the people in your business that are going to drive that. But I think there's some genuine business and client challenges coming with this. It's going to be interesting times.
Can I add one thing I'd like to add, because I think it's really
Please.
important? There's a lot of talk at the moment about the impact on more junior workers from AI. So the people whose jobs typically were doing the more repetitive tasks as a way of getting into an industry. And I would just urge any business leaders that are listening to consider bringing in particularly recent graduates. The first set of AI native students will be graduating in the summer, right? They'll have had AI for all of their uni career. And something we used to do at RNLI was reverse mentoring in the early ages, in the early era of social media, is we paired up new graduates with more senior members of staff, and they trained the more senior member staff to use Twitter or Facebook or whatever the thing was. Actually, I think we're missing a trick as business leaders if we think those are the folks we need to not employ. Those are the costs to save, first of all, because these folks are going to be AI native when they graduate, right? They'll have done it. The people that come out next summer they'll have used AI all the way through university. We, as older folks, can't imagine what that's like. Like, we just simply are not going to be that native and that good with it. No matter how many courses you do, how many things you go on, they have used it all the way and seen it grow all the way through their university career. So I would encourage anyone to think strongly about recruiting graduates or apprentices or anyone in that, particularly in this era. And I think that might seem counterintuitive because a lot of folks are saying you can cut those first. And I'm not saying you should cut anyone. I think human plus AI is important. But I would just put that plea out that actually remember that, because I think if you want to get an advantage as a business, those are the folks you need to think about employing in the coming year.
I'm ahead of the curve, Luke. My 6-year-old has been helping me make business decisions for a long time. Brilliant. So look, thank you, Luke. It's been amazing to have you on today. So thanks everyone for joining us on QInsight. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Next time, we'll be joined by Chris Parks, Microsoft MVP and AI expert, who will be exploring the capacity gap and digital labour. And all that remains for me to say is to learn more about how QGate helps businesses grow through CRM, AI and innovation. Take a look at QGate.co.uk. We'll see you next time.